Let's welcome our guest. He is Dr. Enang, Wisdom Enang. Of course, he is a senior energy consultant, expert, and analyst. Good morning. It's glad to have you here.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Let's kick off with the conversation for today. We're talking about something very crucial, and this has to do with electoral reforms and democratic sustainability in Nigeria. So first off, in very clear terms, could you explain the concept of electoral reforms and why they are very crucial for economics, rather democratic sustainability in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. I think, elect stands on a number of tenets, and one of the first is equity, justice, and fairness. And you cannot have a society that is progressive if people do not feel that there is fairness in the way that the leaders emerge. And so what electoral reforms tries to do is to ensure that that whole process, it's first transparent. That whole process is, of course, at parity with what we would obtain within the global standards. Of course, we do know that when it comes to the success of those methods, that they are meant to be enabled by certain imperatives like technology. However, sometimes we find out that technology, for example, in the beavers for the upload, isn't working in some certain areas, which of course gives the room for improvement. But the entire idea behind the electoral reforms is to ensure that there is that progressive step to taking towards enhancing the transparency, equity, and the fairness of our democracy.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to ask you now, in your own view, on your own perspective, how effective have these reforms been in improving the credibility, emphasis on the credibility of Nigeria's electoral process?
Right, thank you very much. You see, the reform is just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the implementation of the reform. And the implementation of the reform takes into cognizance solving all the gray areas that are crisscrossing the reforms. I'm going to give you context. When you implemented the reform, how well do you implement it? For example, the electoral laws talked about the upload of data for transparent purposes. And then you have the implementation that is done. That's fine, where we have enough significant internet. How do we handle the situation where there's no internet? Some of those are not spelled out in the reform. Some of those are now left to INEC to decide how they're going to handle it. And remember, INEC is typically the star witness, so whatever works for them is typically accepted by the court. Now, let's now go to the court. We've had situations where the elections are won on the field, technically, but they are overturned in court. And then the question you're asking me is, how does that impact the overall democracy that we do run? And the truth is this: there is no way you can certainly say that you have been able to create the electoral reform you need just by the legislation itself, if the legal aspects are going to undermine the integrity of the legislation. That is the first and primary thing that we need to understand. The other thing that we need to understand is when we're implementing, especially with the gray areas, what is the sincerity of purpose of the implementation? Because, again, as I said, even the most well-crafted legislation would have to depend so much on how it is implemented. So, just to answer more directly your question, how has that made things differently? Well, we have improved to a degree, but there's still a lot of areas. Areas of implementation, areas of interpretation when it gets to the law. Those are areas that are still undermining the reforms that we have had. But just to say, we have had very significant reforms. And I'll give you some examples. Before now, it was obtainable to take your ballot papers and then go and vote, do multiple thumb printing in the house and vote. And that could be explained with the number of actual votes that used to happen before. You could see a very huge number of people they were double voting, triple voting by one individual or multiple votes. However, now you see there's an effort towards ensuring there's one vote per person that is being uploaded for the most part. And then, of course, the idea of voting is being checked. But again, what is the interpretation, especially in the gray areas? So there is a lot of improvement. In fact, right now, the number of votes that are determining the winners of the elections have slashed by almost about 60%. Before now, you would see people win by, say maybe 60 million votes. Just look at the presidential elections. Look at the numbers that people won before the current reforms and the numbers of voters, before the current reforms and the number of voters after the reform.
Right.
Now we're beginning to see number of people that partake in those elections.
Okay, so one of the major challenges we have is voter suppression, voter apathy, electoral violence, malpractice, and what have you. I'll just as we're preparing for an election in Edo State on Saturday, how can this challenge of voter suppression and political interference be addressed in future elections as we gear up for Saturday and subsequent ones?
Okay, thank you very much. I think something that you haven't mentioned, it's really, which is a big concern for me, is the idea of buying votes. I think that's been a bigger problem because I've actually voted myself, and in a rural area where I come from in Akwa Ibom. And I can tell you that suppression wasn't really an issue. The reason is any form of violence would trigger the cancellation of those elections at that polling units. And no party who is looking for an advantage will want to create such a situation for themselves. But suppression does still happen. But I'm saying that it might not be enough to alter the outcome of the elections if the election is to proceed anyways. So that's not really my worry. But it's something to watch out for and to report, and it'll be cancelled accordingly. I think the biggest concern that I do have is the idea of buying votes. And that's the one that's really technical and difficult to counter, because this happens under a kind of, I would say, an induced free will of the people that are participating in it. It can go on unannounced and people would definitely get away with it. But then that is where you appeal to Nigerians to say, look, when we see things like the economic consequences of the decisions we make, and that we live with it for at least 4 years, or even more, it then becomes on us as a people to vote with our conscience, vote based on issue-based campaigns, and not really to collect money. There's really nothing you can do. You can try, but technically that is left for the conscience of the voters to decide whether there will be participants of vote buying or not.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to also add one that you did not mention, which is voter apathy. If you look at the last general elections also, we had cases where there were voter apathy. What do you think led to this cause, and how can it be subdued or eradicated to the barest minimum?
Oh, thanks for mentioning that. I actually forgot that. The thing is, a lot of people are driven by psychology on what they feel is going to be the right rationale towards voting. And re-educating people to know that voting should be contextualized within the economic blueprint of wherever you're standing for. What is the economic blueprint? What do they represent? What do they stand for? What does it mean for the progress of the state, for example, or the local government? These are all things that we need to be looking out for. I think education is very key to overcoming voter apathy, because I think ignorance is really one of the key drivers. Sentiment, another key driver. So I think people, and these are what NGOs and the government needs to do, and even the candidates, to sell issue-based campaigns that would then override any other sentimental basis that any voter would want to put in their votes for.
All right. Just as we prepare to wrap up the conversation with you this morning, it's important to touch on marginalized groups. How can Nigeria's electoral system be more inclusive, especially for marginalized groups, women, the youth, the old? You know, how can we have a process where it's all inclusive?
Right. I thank you very much. I'm going to break that down so that we can just eat the flesh a little bit deeper. When you talk about marginalized groups, there are different ways people get marginalized. Even starting from the hassle of collecting your voter's card. I've known people that said, "Well, look, I can't be bothered. If this is the stress I have to go through to collect my voter's card, I wouldn't be bothered." Those are already people that are disadvantaged based on just the stress it takes. So we need to improve that stress. When we then get into the collection of voters' card, there's a huge struggle. Even when it is ready, you have to go and they'll sort it out. You spend hours. That should be solved. You should be able to get a text, come to your location, and then everything is being computerized. Of course, it's lined up properly, and then they just set your name. They know where to go, the catalog number to go and pull out your card for you. That should be made very easy. They should increase the number of hours where, these cards shouldn't just be close to elections. There should be enrollment and collection even during normal times. The other thing that I want to say is when you get to the voting booths itself, I have seen situations where people want to come out and vote. They come out, the voting hasn't started, there's one delay or the other, and they just feel they can't come here and waste all their time. They stroll back home. And I know how long I had to wait to oversee the process and, of course, to vote. And a lot of people, by the time we started voting, about 55% had already gone home. And so you had a lot of people register. By the time it came to voting, when the voting actually started, a lot of people had gone home. And I just think we can do it a lot better. Like even in the US, you could email your ballot boxes. I mean, I'm not saying we should get there if we haven't improved our security architecture, internet architecture, but those are things we can do. All what we need to do to create a more inclusive environment for people is to reduce the stress involved in participating in voting. And that way people will feel more encouraged, make it more transparent, and people will feel more encouraged, and make sure that people's votes count, because you can exclude people, especially the elite class, if they find out that at the end of the day, you still wriggle your way and put false numbers there and the votes don't count. So those are some of the ways we can encourage people to come out and participate.
Okay. In less than 30 seconds, looking at the preparations towards Edo polls, how would you score INEC at this point?
I would say a little bit above average, and I have my reasons because I haven't seen anything that shows me that they are incorporating the lessons learned from the last election, some of the shortcomings of the last elections, and that there's an active, by now I should be seeing a punch list item telling us this is where things went wrong in the last elections, and this is what we have done, and this is why we are sure that this will not be done. I think it's just running through the process like we did last time with no focus on lessons learned, and that's why I'm scoring a little bit above average.
All right. We hope that they learn from this as well and do better in forthcoming elections. Thank you so much, Wisdom Enang, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts with us on the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Do enjoy your morning.
And you too.